Let's understand the reduce function. Reduce, as the name suggests, condenses the value inside a collection into a single value. So the reduce function works on arrays. It could be an array of numbers, string, or object. So let's see how reduce function work. I have an array having elements 1, 5 and 7. Let's calculate the sum of this array. So what I can do is I can use reduce function, and reduce function takes in two arguments. Let's go with the normal way first. I'll call reduce function. The first argument should be an array and the other argument has to be a callback function. So I'll already have a function called sum which calculates the value of item and ACC. So let's check out how we can use it. So I'll call a function sum and pass item and ACC, and then I'll have to specify item and ACC. So this should work now. Yeah, we are getting the value 13. So the sum of 1, 5 and 7 is 13. So over here if we see, we have item which represents the element in the array, and ACC is accumulator which stores the value which is returned by the function sum. So for better readability, let's go with the chaining approach. Let's remove this and add reduce over here. So we get the same output, right? The input is array of numbers and the output is sum, which is given by the sum function. Now let's understand how exactly is this reduce function working. So we have the reduce function implemented and a sum function, right? And let's see how does it work. So it takes the first element, and in the first element the accumulator value over here is not specified, right? So when it is not specified, then it automatically detects based on the operation that is being performed. Over here it's addition, so accumulator value will be defaulted to 0. If it was multiplication, it will make as 1. Since it is addition, it becomes 0. So the first run is sum value, item value is 1 and the accumulator is 0. So 1 plus 0 gives you 1. Then in the next iteration it becomes 5 and the accumulator is 1. So we have 1 being passed as an accumulator, and then it becomes 5 plus 1, which is 6. So now the accumulator value is updated with 6. So what happens? Sum of the third value in array 7 and then it's 6. So 7 plus 6 is 13. And the same things, this are generally becoming stack frames and put into stack and then get replaced by this stack frame, then by this stack frame. So they do not pile up in the stack but effectively get replaced. So if you are having difficulty in understanding what's this stack and everything about how is this happening, so this is basically on the principle of tail recursion. Reduce function will use tail recursion principle, and if you want to better understand that, I have already created a video on tail recursion and tail call optimization, which helps in effectively replacing the frames, thereby eliminating the stack overflow error. So I would recommend you to watch that video. The link is given in the description below, or it will appear at the top right corner in the card section. So effectively, if we see the output, it's nothing but something like this, right? First it starts with 1 plus 0, then to the output of 1 plus 0 5 gets added, and to the output of 5 plus 1, that is 6, 7 gets added. So effectively this is how it's working, right? Now let's try to do some manipulation. What if I do items, I remove this item and instead I do ACC plus item. I get the same thing, right? So we won't understand when it's addition, because addition will lead to same value. So what I'll do is I'll do subtraction. So we are getting 3. What if I reverse this? ACC minus item. We get minus 11, right? Now let's try to understand how things are working in this case when it's item minus ACC. So let's understand what is happening when it is item minus ACC. So the element values are 1, 5 and 7, right? So what we'll do is 1 minus 5 minus 7, and accumulator was initialized with 0 by default because we didn't provide any value. So this is how it will work, right? It's 7 minus 0. 7 minus 0 will give 7. So 5 minus 7 will give minus 2, and 1 minus of minus 2, which will result into the value 3. And that is exactly what we are getting, a positive 3. What if I reverse this? Accumulator minus item. So I'm getting minus 11. Now let's see how does that minus 11 appear. Now what I'll do is, so in this case, when the accumulator is the first value, it behaves slightly different, like it will be 1, then minus 5. The accumulator in this case would become the first element coming, right? So 1 minus 5 and then minus 7. So in this way it becomes 1 minus 5 becomes 4, and minus 4 minus 7 will ultimately give us minus 11. So that is how when you interchange the values, the behavior changes. And if you notice this, when it was 7 minus 0, it is also known as fold right, because the ultimate calculation is happening at the right, and when it is the calculation is happening from starting from the left, it is also called as fold left, which also happened in this case. It started from 1 and from then it continued. So this is also called as fold left, and this is called as fold right. So if we go to the reduce function and if we check, so there are two implementations, right? The first one takes a stream capable array, and the second argument is a callback function with item as the first argument of callback function and accumulator as the second argument of the callback function, and it returns the value. Again, if you see the second one, it has the same implementation, only thing if it has an accumulator as the output, so you will get only the accumulator. So we have used the second one, and it works like fold left. So that is what fold left is. When the calculation starts from left, it is fold left, and when calculation starts from right, it becomes fold right. So that is how reduce works when we interchange the accumulator and the item values. So now we can also initialize the accumulator, like I'll initialize with the value 10, and what do I get? It's minus 3, and it remains same, accumulator minus item. So what happens over here is it's become 10 minus 1, which will be 9. 9 minus 5 is 4, and plus 4 minus 7, and the answer is minus 3. Now what if we do not give this name item and accumulator? So in that case we have implicit names like dollar and $. So dollar is item, whereas $$ will be the accumulator. So if I do dollar plus $, I get the sum. If I do minus, it becomes 3. So dollar and $$ are implicit names for items and the accumulator. So if you do not want to call any function or anything, you just can go right away with $$ and give the implementation. But if you want to initialize the accumulator and make some complex calculation, go with the naming like item and accumulator and then initialize the accumulator. Now that we understood how to use reduce function on array of numbers or string, let's try to implement reduce on array of JSON objects. So I have a mappings variable which has a few mappings. This is a typical mapping which comes from a database where you have a source field column name and a destination field column name, and they have certain values associated with it. And since there are multiple rows, I have only taken 2 rows from the table. So what I actually want is, this is customer name. Suppose this is a customer name at source system, it becomes name at the destination system. So we want to make a key value pair of these two values. Like I want customer name colon name. Instead of source field name colon customer name, I want it customer name colon name. So that is the output that we are looking at. So this problem can be solved using the help of the reduce function, and let's see how we can do that. So mappings is an array. The first criteria has been met, that it has to be array. Now we can use the reduce function, and now let's give the names item and let's give an accumulator to collect the values. And then what we can do is we can use item will have this object, right? So I'll do item dot source field name colon item dot destination field name, right? And this is giving error. Let's put this in a JSON object. Okay, we still have an error. Let's see what the error is. Invalid input expected namespace or attribute. Okay, so what we can do is, this doesn't get evaluated, right? So for this to evaluate, we have to put this in round braces. Okay, now what did we get? We got customer address and address, but we wanted it, if it was address, we wanted customer address and address, right? So the whole thing that we are doing over here, like we are trying to do, we are getting only the last value and not the first value. So did we miss anything over here? Yeah, we missed to add the accumulator. We forgot to collect the values. These are not getting collected. This will get collected only when we add it to accumulator, like acc++. Okay, so what have we got? Source field name and the destination. The source field name and the destination has come. Source field name is customer name and destination field name is name. So now is the output as expected? It appears not to be, right? The only thing that is as expected is customer address and the address, whereas the first object has come as it is. And why has this happened? Let's understand. First of all, when you do not initialize the accumulator, it by default takes any default value. Like if you are doing some addition task on an array of numbers, it will take as 0. For multiplication, it takes as 1. In this case, we have JSON object. So what it has done is, by default, it took the first element of the array as the accumulator. So what has happened? This object plus this object, the reduce of this object has appeared. So this was as it is and it reduced this. The reduce logic got applied on the second and it didn't apply on the first. The first was taken as it is and it got added, right? So that is what has happened. So in this case, you always need to initialize the accumulator with some default value like an empty object. So if I make it an empty object, the accumulator becomes empty, and then the reduce function has been applied to this element as well, and we get customer name and the name value. and same way customer address and the address value. And one more thing to notice, depending on how you have added, now if accumulator is at the start, it becomes fold right, and if I add accumulator at the end, it becomes fold left. Did you observe the change? Customer name has come second, customer address has come first. Depending on the position of accumulator, it works as fold left or fold right. That's another point to keep in mind. Now let's take another example. I have a JSON of orders, and orders is an array which can have multiple orders in it. What I aim to do over here is I want to find out the total of the line items. So an order might have different items, right? In this case it's cookies and soap. So the total price will be 300, and we want to calculate that. And in later part we'll try to add the value in this total, but first we'll just try to get the value, that 100 plus 200, that turns out to be 300. Now let's try how can we get. First of all, we need to go to order, and then the order is an array, but we should not apply reduce to this array because the items have the price and not the order root array, right? So we need to navigate to this items sub array, and on this we can apply the reduce function. So let's see how we can do that. So orders dot orders, we get the array. Now we need to take the first order. We can also apply map, but for the ease of understanding I am just fetching using 0, so I'll take 0, and then what I'll do, I'll go to items. So I have items, and this is the right candidate to apply reduce function. So let's apply reduce function on this, and reduce takes two arguments, item and an accumulator. Now again, if I do not initialize the accumulator over here, by default it will take the first element of the array as the accumulator, which we do not want to happen because we want to add the numerical values. Or else let's try and see what errors do we get, right? So give the anonymous function implementation, and what we'll do is item dot price. This is what we want to add, right? And what we're gonna do is, so now we got 200. Why? Because it took the last value, but I want to add this value to accumulator, and I'm getting some warnings. Let's see what those warnings are. It says you call the function plus with object and number. So if you observe, the object is cookies or the sequence 0, right? So cookies is the first item over here, right? Which means the accumulator took the first element of this array as its default value to get initialized. So we need to initialize this value with a 0. So what do we get? We got the value as 300. Now what if we do not want this 0? We do not want this hard coding to be done. Instead we want it to be dynamic. So what we can do is we can add a map operator, and map operator takes in two arguments. Sorry, map is a function, not an operator. Map function. First is an array, and the next is a function which takes two argument, object and index. Now let's give an anonymous implementation. What we can do, object dot items, because we want to reach the item, right? And we have it got reduced. The reduce function will work as it is. We navigated to the items, right? So if there were multiple orders, like if I just copy and paste this order, again the value should become 600. I get two values, right? 300, 300, because there are two different orders and both line items have been reduced to the sum 300 and 300, right? Now you can also reduce it further to get a single value. So since we have, just apply a reduce, and we don't need to add names and anything right now because it's already everything is number. So what we can do is just use the dollar and dollar plus dollar. So we get the value $600. Is item and accumulator, so we need both the combinations, right? So we use dollar plus dollar to add it and we get the final value as 600. Now our next target is, now let's just make it as single order. Let's remove this, we don't want, let's keep it as it is. I'll just remove this second element so that we can understand better. Okay, now it became 300, right, instead of 600. Now what my target is, I want to print the total over here. So how are we gonna do that? Let's try. I'll remove this, and what I want to do is I want to create the same payload, right, with minimal effort. So what I'll do is orders, I'll have to add order anyways, and then order has to be an array. So what I can do is orders, okay, dot orders. I'm getting the same thing, right? Now what I can do is I can apply map to enter into this because there could be multiple orders, right? So I'll apply map function object and index, and then what I can do is, like, I want to find this total and I want to update, I want to apply a reduce function to this key, right? So what I'll have to do is I'll have to run a map object. So let's put this in round braces and let's run, so that to realize what is the value of total, right? So I need to run a map object. So what I can do is I'll run object map object, and I think map object gives you value, key and index, 3 arguments it takes. Then we can add if else conditions, like if the key as string, remember to make it a string because the type will be as key, so key as string equals total. Then what we can do is total colon apply the reduce function over here. So now to apply the reduce function we need to again go back to orders dot orders, then map. So let's not use map but because I know the index, right, so I can right away use orders of index. The index will, okay, it will be confused. What I'll do is obj index, fine. So the index will be retrieved from the top level map, okay, so it is 0, so it will come as 0. Then now we have to take items, right, so we have items over here, and then apply a reduce function. Reduce again takes item and accumulator, make sure you initialize it with 0, and then the logic acc plus item dot price, sorry it's price, yeah, and else if it is not the key just return else key colon value. So did you observe we got the value as 300? So we have the same JSON, it's same, no changes at all, orders, number, everything is same, and we get the total as 300. All the calculated total is over here. Now what I can do is I can add one more order to the list. I'll just copy this whole order and I'll add one more order to the list. Yep, so two orders got added and both are having total as 300 because I copied as it is. Right now let's change the item line price to 600. Okay, fine, so we get 700, right? So our logic is working fine, right? So this is how we used a reduce function to get the order total, and we placed it in the same location in the JSON array, right? Now let's try to complicate this example further. If you observe in the orders payload or the orders JSON, I have something called as vantage points. Okay, and this vantage points are derived using these two things, points and point mappings. So point mappings tell us which are the values that we need to scan to get the value. For example, it is location, SKU and quantity. So location is in headers, so I'll get it as Pune. Then I'll concat as SKU, that is 1F810A. Then to this I'll concat quantity, which is 50. So I get something like this, right? This becomes a code, and the points that I can get is 30. Same is the case with the next. I get points as 20. So I want to write such a logic which will, using this mapping, it will calculate a value and it will search this value in the points variable JSON and print the point in this vantage point key. Since we are calculating all the values of location, then SKU and quantity and combining it into a single array, this calls out for the use of reduce function on a string array. So let's try to solve this problem. So first what I'll do is I'll just create a function that will find all this value, concat them and create the final value. Okay, so now let's just create a function fun get vantage points, and then what I'll do is I'll give a provision to provide two arguments. One will be headers and another will be lines. Now next what we can do is, so why headers and line? Because this part is header and this part is line, right? And header has location, we can see from here, and lines have the SKU and the quantity, right? So that is why we need both of them. So how we can solve this is like, let's apply if and else condition. If headers dot location, now since we already know that header that location is in header, we can directly use a dot selector and single value selector and call for location, or else you can use a dynamic selector and pass the value as location. Anything is fine. Let's just use a single value selector and type in location. If it headers dot location is equal to okay, sorry, I made a mistake over here. It's not this way. We need to reduce the values of this, right? So we need to first apply, before doing this, we don't need this as of now. We'll need that, but later. First we need to apply reduce, right? So points mapping, based on the values on points mapping, we'll apply a reduced function, and in this reduce function what I can do is I'll give item and accumulator. Remember, since this is a string, right, initialize with blank string, otherwise it will take the first value. So what I'll do, I've initialized it. Now next is give an anonymous implementation, and what we can do over here is let's write the if condition, and we need to scan items, right? If item as string, let's make it a string. It's obviously string, but just let's make it a string, equal to if that is location, we can get it from headers, right? So what we'll do is header dot location. Yeah, so now we get the value location. Else if it is not location, SKU and quantity are in a part of line items, right? So we can get it from lines. Else lines, use the dynamic selector and pass item. And to remove this error, just evaluate it and the error will go away. So what we have done, we ran a reduce on this and we are evaluating the value of location, SKU, quantity, and that will ultimately give us this value. Now that we have created this function, it's time to go back to the actual implementation, to this JSON, and we need to modify this JSON. So we need to add one more else condition, else if. Now we need to search for items array, and then we need to apply a map object because we need to get this value, right? SKU and quantity, we need to get this two values. So if key as string equals items, so these items will come in here, then what we can do is we need to get the value, right? So value is retrieved from this. So what we'll do is value map object, and again map object will give value. So I'll for keep it unique names, I'll use I value, means item value, item key, and item object index. Okay, and then what we have to do is we just have to first have to match the values, right? If we get this vantage points variable, we need to add to it. So again the same thing, we'll need to add if I key, typecast it to string as string equal to, if it's equal to what, equal to vantage point. Let's copy this vantage points. Then what we can do is we can call the function vantage hyphen points colon, what was the function name, get vantage points. Call the function get vantage point, and it requires two arguments, right? So the first argument will be header, so header will come from this object, so let's pass object, and the second one is lines, which we can get from the second map. And what is the second map over here? Okay, so I think we have missed the second object, because let me just copy this first and let me show you what the mistake has been done. The mistake is over here, like value, the items is an array, right? We cannot apply a map object directly to items. We need to apply a map function to the items array, then we can apply map object, because if I directly apply map object, it will be applied on this array, and map object does not work on array. So I need to correct that mistake. I'll do map, then I cannot use object. What I can do is, let's keep it as O and I, and then I know this has become a mess, but The real practical examples are usually such in deeply nested, so we have no choice. So now what we can do is we can run the map object on O, right? So we'll run map object on O, and then okay, the braces are properly placed, we didn't mess up with the braces. Okay, fine. Now what we can do is object, and again we need to pass another line object, right? So we can pass O, and then we can get the value. Now for remaining keys we can just put as else and key value pair, so I key and I value. All right, and then wrap it in round braces. Okay, now I seem to be some errors that we have made. The red lines are not going. Let's see what went wrong. Okay, we need to put this in round braces so that it gets evaluated. Okay, so now the red lines have gone. Let's check the preview once. We don't get the right value. We have two issues. Invalid type provided for object expansion. It expected object, but it's receiving a string. Okay, let's go back and see what went wrong. Alright, first thing that I can notice, I have used a reduce function. I also initialized an accumulator, but I forgot to append the accumulator. The values are not getting appended, but that should not give me the error, right? And okay, I made it a JSON, whereas it should be a string, right? Because ultimately I want to get a concatenation of the string, right? So I think that's the problem. It is saying it's trying to expand the object, whereas this is not an object, so it's a string. So what we can do, just remove this, and okay, so now that I've removed, the error has gone, but I'm getting only 50, right? That's because that's the last value quantity, and I forgot to add the accumulator. So let's add the accumulator, ACC plus plus. Since it is a string, I'll do plus plus. Okay, so now I'm getting finally the key, which is defined in the points, right? So we have created the coupon type key, and now we just want to get the value associated with this key. So again, same thing, use a dynamic selector. So the points variable is having, right? So what I'll do, I'll just add points, and I should get the value. Yeah, perfect. I'm getting the value 30 and 20, and these are not string. Let's make it as number, and the value gets converted into number. So that is how we can use reduce function in different ways. This was one practical example where you can actually use reduce. Now what if the vantage point key itself was not present? So how would have we done that? So let's just remove this key, right? I don't need this key. Let's remove this, and let's remove it from here. So if we see, the vantage points key got removed. So in that case, what we would have done is we would have simply removed this whole thing. We don't need it. We just, let me remove this and remove this as well, and okay, so for that I would need to remove the whole thing, right? So instead what I can do here is, so for that to happen, we need to get rid of all this part, right? and this is not map object is no more required because we need not check vantage points because the key itself is not present now. So we can safely remove this part, and I just need this part to be copied. Let's just copy this and remove everything else. So I'll remove this map object. It's not required anymore because we don't need to check the key, right? It was only to check that key we were using it. Now instead what I can do is I'll just paste that. So what I get the vantage point key, but other values are lost. So how do I get that? Again, I can use the plus plus function, but I'll use with the object that is O and then add a plus plus. So that should give me the value, but it's not working, right? I am getting some error because this is an object whereas this isn't. So we need to make an object. When you enclose it in curly braces, this becomes an object, but still it's giving error. Like, so we need to, okay, we are making it as an object, we are giving curly braces, but there's no key value pair formed, right? So we need to, instead what we can do is we can either remove this two curly braces and we get the output, or if you still want the curly braces to be there, then you can simply evaluate this whole equation. So the error goes, and once you evaluate, I think even this is not required then. Yeah, so that is not required. So you either go with curly braces or add this round braces and it should work perfectly. So what did we do? First we calculated the total using the reduce function, then we calculated the vantage points using the reduce function, and that was using some mapping and finally calculating out. So in this example that we solved right now, we used the map function, the map object function, the dynamic selector and the reduce function. So the practical examples, the practical problems that you would face while developing would be such type of example. So I thought of taking this example and it covered multiple functions, right? So this is how you usually use reduce function in combination with other function. So I hope you would have found the explanation of reduce helpful. Thanks for watching.